Okay, let's dig into this. Have you ever found yourself in a political discussion, maybe online, right? And you just watch it completely fall apart, go from ideas to something else entirely.
Yeah, we've all seen that happen. So today we're doing a deep dive into one very specific perspective on that whole phenomenon. The source material we're working with is a document called The Left's Propensity for Babbling and Name-Calling when Outclassed Intellectually.
Right, and just to be really clear about our goal here, this deep dive,
Yeah.
we're aiming to impartially explore, what this specific source argues, what it claims about certain behaviors, behaviors that links to one side of the political spectrum, and the impact it thinks this has on society. It's really, really crucial that we stress our role is simply to convey the ideas in this source material. We're absolutely not endorsing its viewpoints. The document itself uses some, let's say, very direct and provocative language, and our job is just to understand its specific perspective. Absolutely, totally clear. So what's the plan? What are we actually digging into today? We'll look at how this document sees colloquial discourse, why it thinks these behaviors happen, the examples it gives, the role of social media in its view, and then, the consequences it outlines and maybe some solutions it proposes. It's definitely a journey through one particular, quite focused lens.
Okay, so starting point. The document notes that political discourse, well, it's been polarized for a long time. That's not new. But how does it describe the more recent changes? What's different now, according to the source?
Well, it really zeroes in on social media platforms. It argues they've massively sped up the fragmentation of opinion, leading to what it calls echo chambers, those online spaces where you mostly just see views you already agree with. And the document's point is that these chambers tend to amplify what it labels extremist perspectives.
So the idea is social media helps keep people in their own bubbles, ideologically speaking. And within those bubbles, what does the document claim is happening to, like, traditional debate? How has engagement changed? It asserts that the old norms of, civil debate, they've often been pushed aside, replaced by what it calls ad hominem attacks, basically, attacking the person, not their argument, and a lot more emotional language. And here's a key point from the document. It specifically claims these tendencies are particularly on the left side of the political spectrum. And it suggests, or posits, that these kinds of responses may indicate a lack of engagement with opposing views and an inability to articulate counter-arguments effectively. Again, that's the document's claim.
Okay, that's quite a specific assertion. So if the document is claiming this behavior exists, what reasons does it give? Why does it think this tendency for what it calls name-calling or babbling happens?
It unpacks a few factors it sees contributing, things like ideological rigidity, so really sticking firmly to your beliefs. Also, the terms a culture of sensitivity, and a really strong emotional investment in social justice causes. The document explains that, in its view, for people on the left, defending concepts like equity and inclusion often becomes like the main driving force.
I see. So if that defense of equity and inclusion is the core motivation, what does the source suggest happens when those really deeply held values get challenged or criticized?
Right. This is where it gets interesting, according to the document.
Yeah.
It suggests that when faced with those criticisms, an emotional reaction can kind of take over, overshadowing more rational discussion. It even brings in some psychology, citing recent studies in political psychology to back this up.
Ah, psychological insight. Okay, that
Yeah.
sounds like an important piece of its argument. So what do these studies show, according to the document? How does that explain the reaction?
Well, the idea presented is that when individuals perceive a threat to their beliefs, they are more likely to respond defensively. That's the core concept it draws on. And the document explains how this defensiveness can look like aggressive counterattacks rather than reasoned arguments, end quote. It then concludes, from its perspective, that when dialogue turns contentious, some leftists may default to name-calling as a mechanism of defense, effectively shutting down deeper discussions. So the implication is that the babbling or name-calling is framed as a kind of protective reflex against perceived ideological threats.
Got it. So it's drawing this line from perceived threat through emotional investment to a specific communication style. Does the document give concrete examples of this? What scenarios does it point to?
It does. It talks about climate change debates, for instance. The document observes that proponents of, say, aggressive environmental policies might just dismiss opponents as climate deniers. And the source argues that doing this serves to delegitimize the opposing viewpoint rather than discussing the merits and flaws of other arguments. It avoids the substance, basically.
And what about social media specifically? Are there examples given from that sphere?
Oh, absolutely. It details observations where it says high-profile figures on the left have used terms like fascist or, racist to label people who oppose progressive policies.
Okay, that's something you definitely hear about in online arguments. How does the document argue that this kind of labeling impacts the actual conversation, the quality of it?
Its core argument is that this sort of name calling can diminish productive dialogue. Simple as that. Because the focus shifts, right? It moves away from talking about the issues, the policies, and instead becomes about these disparaging characterizations of opponents. And the document says the result is that this diminishes public understanding and engagement on critical issues. The real discussion gets lost.
And it seems the document really emphasizes social media's role in making this worse. It mentions platforms like Twitter, Facebook, enabling fast chat, but also maybe encouraging brevity and sensationalism. How does it link to that, to the behaviors we're talking about?
Yeah, it makes a direct link. It argues that things like character limits, on Twitter especially, they force people to boil down complex ideas into tiny sound bites. And the document suggests that users often fall back on catchy phrases or insults because they resonate more readily with audiences than nuanced discussions.
Wow.
The implication is that the platforms themselves almost reward these quick emotional jabs over thoughtful debate.
That's a strong claim about how the platforms are structured. And the document brings in some research here too, doesn't it? Something from the Pew Research Center.
That's right. It cites research by Pew, which apparently indicates that polarized political discussions online tend to focus more on personal grievances and name-calling rather than factual analysis. So the document uses this to imply that this whole dynamic online discourages individuals from engaging with opposing views vigorously. It keeps people sort of ensconced in groups that echo their sentiments, which, in the document's view, just confirms biases and wears away at the principles of democratic debate.
Okay, so if that's the problem description, according to the source, what does it say are the bigger implications for public discourse, for society?
Well, the document argues pretty directly that this tendency, it describes the babbling or name-calling it, fundamentally impairs public discourse. It suggests that when political debates are missing that civility, missing thoughtful arguments, the overall quality of our public conversation just declines.
And it goes further, suggesting this decline poses significant risks for democratic processes. That sounds serious. What kind of risks is it talking about there?
It points to things like the spread of misinformation
Right.
and just generally increased polarization. But also it suggests that if dialogue isn't constructive, people might just check out entirely, disengage from politics, which could lead to voter apathy. So yeah, it's framing it as a potential threat to democratic health itself.
Wow, okay. Serious stuff. And it even connects this to education, saying schools and universities are vulnerable. How does it see this issue playing out in the, say, educational settings?
The concern raised in the document is that if students are consistently exposed to these contentious styles of argumentation that favor belittlement over understanding, well, they might just adopt those same strategies themselves. And the document contends this could actually stunt their ability to think critically and make it harder for them to handle difficult conversations later in life. So the insight it's offering is about how today's communication habits might be shaping the next generation's capacity for dialogue.
Right. So given all these quite significant implications it raises, does the document offer any way forward? What potential solutions does it propose? Where can we start, according to this source?
It does lay out a few potential strategies. First off, education. It suggests boosting educational efforts focused on civics and critical thinking. The idea is to better equip people for reasoned debate. And also programs that actively promote respectful debate and teach conflict resolution, trying to build a culture of understanding.
Okay, education is one piece. What about the social media platforms? Does the source think they need to change?
Oh, definitely. It proposes that platforms could implement algorithms designed to prioritize constructive dialogue, and maybe even penalizing users who resort to inflammatory rhetoric. It also really emphasizes promoting media literacy among users, helping people learn to spot and question emotionally loaded claims, not just react to them.
Makes sense. So education for individuals, changes by platforms. Does the document suggest any other maybe broader structural ideas for improving discourse?
Yes, it does. It talks about encouraging bipartisan discussion forums. And the key point here, according to the document, is that these spaces should explicitly focus on finding common ground rather than deepening divides. What's kind of interesting is sources believe that when people with differing viewpoints come together to discuss issues peacefully, it can lead to improved understanding and reduced polarization. It's basically arguing for structured, intentional engagement as a fix.
Okay, so let's quickly recap then. We've spent this deep dive exploring a specific document, one that argues there's a propensity for babbling and name-calling on the political left. especially when facing intellectual challenges. And the document's core contention is that this behavior, as it describes it, undermines public discourse and the democratic process. It sees it as limiting effective communication and getting in the way of making collective progress on big societal problems.
Exactly. And maybe if we connect this to the bigger picture, it raises a useful question for you, the listener. How does understanding one specific perspective on political debate dynamics, like the one laid out in this document we discussed, how does that help you better navigate and maybe contribute more effectively to the, let's face it, complicated challenges society faces today, regardless of where you personally stand politically?
Yeah, that's a great point. Maybe something to think about is what personal steps you might take, perhaps drawing on some of the document's own suggestions to foster more constructive dialogue in your own life, your own interactions. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive.